Jeremy, over to you.
Many thanks indeed, and very good to be with you, Tim. This talk, I can see in many ways, complements where Harry has just been. The difference are very much, as you will see as we go through the slides, I suspect, is that I'm looking at the different advice that every individual business will need. The background for the CAAV, Central Association of Agricultural Valuers, is that it's a professional association, so it's not representing interests. It's looking to ensure that professional advisors can give professional advice to each client. We've been around for 110 years as a national profession. Our work is growing, and we're increasingly active across the whole rural economy as that becomes increasingly more diverse. And we have gone in the last decade to be UK-wide, Scotland joining us in 2010, Northern Ireland in 2015. Throughout that, we're acting for and advising farmers and owners and others in the rural economy. And our role with members is to brief them, to represent them, and to qualify them through examinations, and those who pass the examinations become fellows at CAAV. Looking ahead and building perhaps more on what Harry was saying, we see great accelerants of change coming through at the moment. Everybody, of course, has talked about Brexit, though that has become a little in the background just briefly, though it's coming around again, but with the virus. We have Brexit driving changes, I could suspect a generation's worth of change within the next decade. But behind that and beyond that, we have then the changes coming through from climate change and climate change policy, driving over a generation, but a lot having to be done in the next decade in order to have a platform to hit the 2050 target. And looking at each business and looking at the sector as a whole, we're looking at the question of how you manage change or be managed by it. We're moving towards markets. I'm going to take you beyond politics to look at business. We'll want to watch asset values, profits, as Harry was saying, prices of goods as those change, how asset values change, some assets possibly becoming simply stranded, whether because of the effects of flooding from climate change or other market changes. And at the heart of this, for a large part of the rural economy, the issues of farming productivity and farming economics. So we have the external pressures, the advent of technology, the new technologies, world markets and changing public taste and our greater openness to both, environmental concern and climate change. But internally, we have productivity, the structural change coming and probably coming in some force, the need for skills for investment for innovation to adapt to a radically changing and much more open set of market conditions. How that works through with land occupation, tax and other issues, and new policies and the bases for trade. That is a very challenging and turbulent environment for us to try to master rather than for us to be on the receiving end of it. And it seems worth just keeping an eye on this and some sense of perspective as to where value really lies. People talk a lot about subsidy and point out that in terms of net profit, it can often, for many ordinary conventional farming businesses, amount to a very significant fraction of the margin they make. But of their gross income, product sales is vastly more important. And indeed, a relatively modest movement in product prices dwarfs very considerable movements in subsidy value. And it's that I think we need to keep an eye on. It is the delivery of effective businesses to thrive in the future that matters. And indeed, the role of subsidy in that then varies dramatically between sectors and by farm performance. High output sectors, less exposed to subsidy, more subsidized sectors, clearly more so, simply by virtue of that. We're looking, and you wanted a perspective on land management, we're looking at competing land uses. The whole pressure on the crucible of rural land in a crowded island like Great Britain, you're looking at competing uses, the tensions that land goes for development, land is wanted for environment, land is wanted for food. Some of those uses can overlap, some of them compete directly. The list on the rest of this slide, very largely drawn from the Climate Change Committee's recommendations for land use, but where we go with carbon sequestration, soil management, compatible, very compatible with food production, trees, much less so. We have, as has just been mentioned, biodiversity, net gain, and the opportunities for perhaps capital and perhaps income from that, but how far that will be biodiversity delivered by agricultural and food production means, or in place of it, remains to be seen. The challenge of greenhouse gas reduction, all told, through land management, livestock slurry fertilizers, again, issues of air quality brought into there, restoring peatlands, bioenergy crops, and added to the Climate Change Committee's list the prospect of plants for plastic and other new uses for what can be produced from the land. Harry has talked mainly about the public sector, referring, of course, to private interests as well. And I'm perhaps going to lead here the other way around, just so we draw out that tension or the opportunity. It's not just the state. There are very large sums of money potentially available from private finance. Our problem is finding how to marshal and manage and attract them. We will see a framework set by regulation, the rising regulatory baseline. We could see tools from taxation and the taxpayers' money there with whether it's subsidy or support or contracts, there again as tools. But companies are under increasing pressure, whether it's down the supply chain or simply just needing to offset their particular goals. The Task Force on Climate Change Disclosure is producing a tighter set of demands on businesses, large businesses, to look at where they're going on climate change issues. There are powerful needs, indeed, as we've seen recently, to look at protecting supply chains and reputations. Secure contracts with better prices combine producers into those supply chains in ways that are a relatively small cost to some purchasers and processors. Harry's mentioned insurers, developers, water companies, all in the end focus on land management if we can find ways of dealing with that. But on the farm, virtually everything here is outside the farmer's reach. What the farmer controls is what's under his boot, just as has been true for centuries. Worth understanding the outside pressures, review the business, raise its performance, consider enterprise choices or other business, and we'll come on to some of those issues in a little while. The options for structural change or retirement. But coming to a question that gets asked quite often at this point, farming's instinct to defer decision, there can, in the world that we foresee, be no reason for deferring the management of change. If you start now, or indeed as the Chinese are supposed to say, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the second best time is now. Think now, understand, weigh the options, talk, then decide, and then act. So looking at this from the point of view of professional advisors, clients facing major change, and some of it coming quite sharply as BPS comes to be phased out, and as we move possibly towards more open international markets. What will clients want from advisors? And that's where we have, over the last couple of years in the CAAV, set in hand a future skills program, looking at what will support our members, support their clients as we move into that world. At the front of that, and work already developed on business review skills. How do you look at a business? How do you talk them through it? What are the options? Different answers for different families on different farms, even identical farms, but with different families will have different answers. And we published Reviewing a Business in December as a text on this and are carrying forward work on that front to support members. Environmental resources, innovation and technology, new business activities, and effective and appropriate dispute resolution, all part of that matrix of trying to help support businesses through all of this. There is our publication on reviewing a business, as I said, published in December, and going through, trying to help people go through and understand the issues in play from the accounts right the way through to how you hold the conversation. We hit, though, this basic issue of farm economics and productivity. We have, on all the official data, a relatively poor productivity record. In brutal terms, British agriculture has generally tracked the exchange rate more than seen a pattern of improvement. And the figures can be hammered home, but it comes back to skills, investment, innovation. It comes back to getting the right people on the land to do the right things on that land. It also has to be said that those are averages. We will see that higher performance farms do distinctively better. The range, as almost any advisor knows, is enormous. But we're dealing with a sector that ex-subsidy is making little money at the average, at the aggregate. That simply takes estimates from later last year for 2019, effectively less than £1 billion of margin once you discount for subsidy. It is worth pointing out, of course, that the subsidy will have flowed heavily into cost along the way, but you're still talking about relatively low return on that turnover. And you see that the historically supported sectors are the ones that in the middle years of the last decade tended to be the ones that lost money. But there, just taking Farm Business Survey figures for combinable cropping, there is the difference in performance between the average, the top quartile, and the bottom quartile from farming. This is before subsidy, this is before agri-environment, this is before other on-farm income. This is the distribution of the money that was made or lost from the activity and the decision of farming. And the top quartile made £200 odd a hectare. The bottom quartile lost over £300 a hectare. That difference will show in every part of the UK and in every sector. And challenging that is a fundamental thing that will come as the cushion of BPS is withdrawn. We need to look to how to adapt this. This is where Brexit accelerates change. We have had area payments of one form or another for a generation since McSharry in '93. How we adapt to that change with new structures, using the new technologies, changing in who is farming, looking much more effectively at marketing, home and abroad, and a little question I'll pose later about scale. But it comes back to margin, not cash flow, not gross cash flow necessarily, but margin. Where does profit lie, the return on our endeavours? BPS, very high margin. If you remove BPS and even allowing, as Harry hoped, for the possibility of some profit on elms, is that £1 billion of lost margin over the 7-year transition period? To be clawed back from costs by changing structures, and much of that can be done over a timescale like 7 years. And that's the time in which decisions need to be made for people even to stand still, never minding the kind of progress that we would like to see. And it drives you to those thoughts about who is farming, who comes in, who goes out, generational succession, 1 or 2 generations, is the generational succession outside the family, the facilitating issues in that, the advice, the housing issues, and so on. And the key changes in the how of farming that the right people will then be able to use in production, farm structures, the technologies, marketing, land use. And it's managing those changes well, rather as Harry concluded, is critical at the level of each individual business as it seeks to find and to hold commercial margin. So again, review and act, said already, the standard things here. But the theme I return to again is managing change before it manages you. Adding value. The rest of UK manufacturing moved into speciality and high value produce when it went through the mill in the 1980s. How far is it right that British farmers remain commodity growers? Many can be, but can all and should all? Those are decisions for each to face. What will earn a margin? Adding value. People can look at special things to do. A challenge in that quite frequently though is scaling up to a margin, to a scale that delivers significant turnover and profit. It's an interesting observation that perhaps now 1/3 of British farm output by value comes from being undercover, whether it's horticulture under plastic, right through to where we're now experimenting with controlled environment farming. Adding value to capital, to income, through data, soils, carbon, water, biodiversity, other activity. And you can see the post-COVID economy possibly offering attractions in the rural economy for industry and business services to relocate. And an underlying challenge here is whether farming is and remains the principal form of land management. Head on, the environment is an enterprise. See it as an enterprise, alongside your lamb, alongside your wheat, alongside your milk. The question is, and Harry referred to the phrase, you've seen public money being offered for public goods. For that to be a transaction, the question is, why should you sell public goods? Where is the margin? Where does it fit? Is it in synergy with your productive farming, soil management classically? Can it go alongside it? Is it a substitute for less profitable farming? Where does it work together? What opportunity costs do you incur through going for woodland or whatever? But looking at the marketplace, not only including the state, but those other private sector interests and how we put that together. So scale for income, I've already mused about that on the question of speciality. How do you build scale for income? A commodity business will want land, but commodity businesses are now getting much more choosy about the land they want to take. They want opportunities that will give a margin and help support overheads, ultimately profit. But if you're not a commodity business, the scale of your business may no longer be measured in acres. Either way, you may be looking for land that suits you or looking to release land that no longer does. That land may well be an opportunity, though, for somebody else to come in and be part of that process of change, of accelerated change that we foresee. There's also the point that new technology may alter the case for scale. Much of this has been driven by new, larger machinery in order to fund the man. Once you have unmanned machinery, those dynamics of cost begin to change. And scale in public goods. Some of those private sector capital interests will need to see people come together as large groups to provide packages that are efficient transactions for private finance, while biodiversity itself gains more value with scale. So again, tackling some of those. And so I come back as a professional association, advising tenants, advising owners, advising all with an interest in these matters. The external view. Farmers can make themselves very busy as a means of avoiding looking at these things, and then things get out of perspective. The external view to get things in perspective, looking at other farms and a broader experience, and the value to a family farm of a safe challenger, somebody who can put the questions to them that they might resent from somewhere else, and that turns on the quality of the relationship. There's social support and knowledge exchange in this, sometimes with other farmers, but also from the advisor. But the two sorts of professional advice. There is specialist help. You want a planning permission. You want a nutrient management plan. That's specific. But what CAAV members can bring is the rounded appraisal, the strategic advice. How does tax fit with planning, with the tenancy agreement, with the bank finance constraints, and understanding what the family want as well? Where do they want to be in 10 years' time, and how are we going to get there? And so facilitating the conversation with the family and others, or indeed between landlord and tenant or other interested parties. And there's this nice phrase from the Welsh Government's consultation paper of last year. Advice should be seen as investment in the capacity of farmers and farms rather than the cost. Of course, it then has to be good advice, and I would summarize that as quality and chemistry, the right advice from the right person for that family. So we have large issues. We have those great large issues of international trade, of changing public policy in each part of the United Kingdom as we go ahead over the coming decade. But they have to be answered on individual farms, by each landowner and each farmer finding their answer in their family circumstances, with their resources and their weaknesses, their assets and their strengths. And there are no absolute answers in a market economy in a liberal society. People are free to hunker down and take the pain, but we would rather they took the positive opportunities. We will almost certainly see a much less standardized rural economy than we've been used to. More people doing more interesting things in search of more profit. So the personal preferences are part of that, and new skills and new opportunities. And we're looking then at encouraging people to take the better answers. But that requires on help in negotiating the obstacles. And I come back to that theme that I've now already stressed a couple of times. But the theme that we have to take in looking at the future is that of how we manage change rather than being on the receiving end of it, leaving it to manage us.